Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to Afternoons with an Author. And today, the author is none else than Parameswaran Iyer. Param Iyer, who is very well known both within the civil services and also outside the civil services. Welcome, Param, to this Afternoons with an Author. This is a joint collaboration or a joint partnership between the CSOI, the Value of Words, the Society for Contemporary Affairs at LBSNA, and our sponsors for today's program include Tribes India, Coal India, Incredible India, and Green Panel. Welcome to this Afternoons with an Author. Now, this is, friends, for all those who are joining this for the first time, this is the sixth conversation that we have with an author. The first one was on Making India Great Again. This was by Meeta and Rajiv Lochan. The second one was Footprints on the Sands. This is Rajiv Ratna Shah and Amitabh Kant. Then we had another conversation on Buddha's Trail, A Journey to the East, which looked at how the Indian philosophy has moved across the continents from India right up to Japan. And then we had this discussion on the forts of Rajasthan, again by two senior IAS officers, Rita Sharma and Vijay Sharma. And last time we had Samir Sharma talking about urban geography. Today we are very privileged to have this book, Method in Madness, Method in the Madness. So I have which I mentioned also in the CNBC program. I think it is method in the miracles which Param has been able to create. Because it is the miracles that Param has been able to create, which is much more. And I really don't think it's madness. There's a magic and there's a miracle and there's a miracle of hard work to that. But that's over for the end. What I'm doing today is we are connecting very senior civil servants, because Param would have retired by this time, with the youngest entrants to the civil service. And Chandrajyoti, in fact, happens to be one of the youngest members of the Indian civil service today. And Shrestha Anupam is also with us. And the other great thing about both the lead discussants today is that both have been secretaries of the Society for Contemporary Affairs. And many years ago, I was also the secretary for Contemporary Affairs when I was in Phase 1 and FC. So that, connects all of us together. So all of us have been interested in discussions, have been interested in debates. So what we'll do today is that we'll first invite Param to talk about his book very briefly for 5 to 7 minutes, followed by Shrestha asking a question, then Chandrajyoti asking a question, and the dialogue moves on, and we continue for about 45 to 50 minutes. So over to you, Param, and welcome to the Academy virtually, and welcome to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Sanjeev and Chandrajyoti. Shrestha, it's a real pleasure to be with you today. And actually, it's a privilege to also interact with three secretaries, one former of the Society for Contemporary Affairs. I have to confess that when I was in the academy, I stayed clear of all the societies. So it's good to connect with all of you and talk a little bit about my book. I have to thank Sanjeev as well, who's a prolific author, waiting for his book, by the way, Sanjeev, and who runs the Value of Words, the event, and who's done so much for, I think, the academy, but also for writing of books and articulating different viewpoints. So thank you once again. About my own book, it's interesting. Sanjeev, you mentioned there's no madness. For me, madness was a metaphor for the twists and turns which, Sanjeev, you and I have taken in our respective civil service careers. And I'm sure the youngsters will experience many twists and turns themselves. So it was just a metaphor for the unpredictability of what happens, and try to find some method to go with that, to go with the flow, seize the moment, and kind of steer your way through what promises to be a fascinating career in the civil service. So it was a metaphor for that. My wife's title, also her idea to write the book. She said, you've done all these crazy things. You have gone inside, outside. You've been a road manager to your daughter, who was a professional tennis player. So maybe you should write about it. And then when the lockdown started, I remember March 24th, travel got stopped. And I used to travel, almost twice a week to different parts of India, to the field, to state governments, to the districts, to villages. So I saved a lot of travel time, at least 3-4 hours a day. So I managed to put in early morning. I followed my father's example when he was a young pilot officer in Srinagar. He learned French, he told me, in the old Linga phone using gramophone records from 4:30 in the morning. So I would set my alarm and then start writing. It was difficult in the beginning, but then when I got some structure, so started writing from about 4:30 to 7:30 every morning, got disciplined at that, and managed to kind of hammer out a first draft in about 6 months, and then kind of worked with HarperCollins to polish it up after I got back to Washington, D.C., where I'm now. I've been here since September. It's a virtual world, missing all the action in India. And, so my wife and I decided that we would divide this into three parts. Insider, the first 19, 20 years of my career in the service. Then the outsider part. I've been working in the bank actually off and on for about 14 years. So what did I do in the World Bank? Then, of course, I think perhaps the most interesting part of my career, being a road manager and coach to my daughter and son. And then when I received that incredible opportunity to come back to the government of India in early 2016 was Inside and 2 again. And so it ends a little bit, I've got a little postscript back in Washington. And you've seen that, Sanjeev, and life is much quieter here, but who knows, it might change again at some point. But so that's about the book. It was a fascinating, great experience writing it as well. Very good discipline. And one thing I did keep was a diary, particularly during my road manager stint, which really helped me a lot. And have a bit of a diary throughout my career. So that helps a lot because it's quite difficult to recollect when you've done 40 years like I have. It becomes a bit challenging to remember many things. So let me stop there, but really looking forward to discussing the book and anything else with you. Thank you.
Sure, great. Over to you, Shrestha.
So I would like to ask a question. So you have worked in both hierarchical systems like the Indian bureaucracy and the non-hierarchical systems like the World Bank. What's the key difference that you think that hierarchy brings to the working of a system?
It's a good point. I've made a reference to that in the book, if you've seen it. It was a bit of a culture shock to me. We're all used to our badges, seniority, and yes, sir, and no, sir. And so when I joined the bank, the lady is a very good friend of mine now called Barbara Evans. She said, "Hello, Param, welcome to the water and sanitation program." And I was a little bit taken aback. I was the project director of Swajal in the UP cadre in Lucknow, used to everyone calling me sir. So, but I got used to it pretty fast. So I think a couple of differences. In a flat organization, I think it's really knowledge which drives your credibility, right? In a hierarchical organization, I mean, obviously knowledge should be, driving your credibility and it adds to your sort of overall effectiveness. But we get very easily used to a hierarchy. I think there is merit to a hierarchy in the civil service, particularly in a district where there's unity of command. You're dealing with a law and order situation. And I think their clear-cut, hierarchy, accountability, it makes a big difference. So I think there's really no scope for having a very flat organization. So it depends on the situation. In the World Bank, on the other hand, which is more a knowledge organization, where people come in based on specialization, on expertise, and having kind of in-depth experience in a particular sector. Their hierarchy, I mean, it's very difficult for when I was a program manager in the World Bank, and someone sent me one of their implementation support reports on a project to review. You can't really pull rank out there. You've got to argue on merits. You've got to know the subject. And so I think that in a knowledge organization, which is increasingly the world today, it's knowledge which accounts for credibility and effectiveness. So I would classify it that way. I think each one has got its merits, but I think increasingly in today's complex world, knowledge really drives credibility and clout.
I think it's very well put. And this whole point that the driving force in a non-hierarchical system has to be command over knowledge. And as a matter of fact, I think even in our system, even in the very, very state bureaucracy, that's beginning to happen. We are beginning to listen to the person who knows the subject. So the meeting might be chaired by someone, but we are moving towards that. And I think in this hierarchy is much more pronounced in the UP and Bihar cadres. It's not as pronounced as in some of the other cadres. I'll not name the cadres. It's not all that pronounced. But over to you, Chandrajyoti, and after this, you keep the dialogue going. Over to you, Chandrajyoti.
So I continue with that question itself. I wanted to ask you, like, how was it different for you once you became an insider from being an outsider? So in one of your interviews, you talk about your non-sarkari ways and how your staff was sort of scandalized by your work culture and how you approach things. So do you think your stint at World Bank helped you better shape the Swachh Bharat mission, and how did it impact you overall in the years to come?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Chandrajyoti. So I got used to a more informal sort of flat organization, which Shrestha just referred to, working in the World Bank, where essentially the hierarchy is extremely limited, where you are judged more by your knowledge and expertise, as Sanjeev said. So coming back to the system, I brought a little bit of that culture back to my ministry, and. But again, you've got to really, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? So it's very difficult to completely change an organization. You've got to go with the flow. But a couple of interesting, funny things which happened when I came back. So, they sent me the car, I was, staying in UP Bhavan. And this was, the 1st of March, 2016. And so I reached the ministry, and then I find 3 or 4 people niche in CGO complex. One guy picks up, and I carry a backpack, by the way, which is another interesting thing. Normally you have a leather briefcase in government. So I sling a backpack over my left shoulder. So I got out of the car, and immediately one of them made a grab for my backpack. First of all, they looked pretty scandalized at the backpack. They were expecting to see a leather briefcase. So they tried to take it away from me. I tried to get it back, and finally I let go. So then we went. There was someone in, if you've been to the Parameswaran Bhavan, it used to be called. Now it's called something else. And so, the lift was kept open. They took me up to the 4th floor. And when I walked into this massive office, I saw Parameswaran Iyer IAS written on it. I kept quiet. I went in. And during the course of the day, I told my principal private secretary, my PPS, Gosai, I said, Gosai ji, ye IAS hata dijiye. So he said, "Kyun sahab, aap to secretary in Government of India hain? Ab IAS mein nahi hai kya?" I said, "Ab main IAS mein nahi hu." So it took a bit of resistance in the beginning. Finally, they removed the 3 letters. So I said, listen, I'm a secretary to the Government of India, but I'm technically not in the IAS anymore. So they gave in and they removed it from my business card as well. But apart from that, I'm used to coming into office very early. And in the World Bank in particular, I used to come in even earlier because since I was managing the South Asia region, 50% of my staff were in the field offices in Delhi, in Kabul, in Islamabad, in Colombo, in Kathmandu. So to catch the time zone and the differences, I used to be in office at 6:30 in the morning. So when I came back to Delhi, I was, obviously 6:30 wouldn't have made any sense in Government of India. And so I had a tough negotiation with my wife, who's been advising me all through, as you've read in the book. She said, listen, office hours are 9 o'clock. Most people come in by 10. She said, don't go before 8:30 or everyone will hate you forever. So I used to come at 8:30, come early in the morning, relatively early. I found that a great time, to sort of catch up for the day, good thinking time before all the meetings start. And another thing which was interesting was, again, my wife's advice. She said, listen, you've got a 2-year contract. That was my initial contract. I stayed on for 4.5 years. And she said, listen, you've got 2 years. You better make every day count. So why don't you put up a whiteboard behind you and write 2 numbers. One, the number of days you have spent, and second is number of days left. And that will remind you that you're on a mission out there. You're implementing Prime Minister Modi's flagship program. You better get the job done, and every single day you should have an outcome. So that was Indira's great advice, which I followed. And everyone was a little surprised to see that whiteboard behind me in a kind of state Sarkari office. So let me stop there, but there were many other interesting anecdotes.
So you resigned from World Bank in 2006 to take up the role of a coach, road manager of your daughter, Tara Iyer. How difficult was the decision, sir? And what were the various thoughts that were running through your head when you took this decision?
Look, it was not really a difficult decision. Actually, what happened was I had first applied for 2 years leave from the World Bank, and my then boss refused. He had just given me what is known as an open-ended position in the bank, which is, you carry on till you retire. And so he was unhappy that I was leaving within a year of that. So he was trying to dissuade me. For me, the timing was everything, and that's one of the lessons I've learned in the book. You've got to seize the moment. So Tara was 16 or 17. She had wanted to play professional tennis, and that window of 4 to 5 years was critical. It couldn't have been postponed. So when my boss said no, I resigned. And because for two reasons. One is she needed a road manager and coach. And I'd been coaching her from the beginning, having failed at becoming a professional tennis player, I still knew the game. And so I had to be her coach, but someone needed to travel with her. So this phrase, road manager, was coined by a good friend of mine at the bank called Lee Travers. He says, Param, you are now a road manager. I said, great. And in fact, many people today know me more as Tara's coach come road manager rather than anything about Swachh Bharat. So it was a tough decision in terms of quitting. And it was difficult financially as well. So, we had to come back to Delhi. Fortunately, the UP government had been very kind. And so I was still on 622 from the government. I was on secondment to the World Bank. So I quit the World Bank, applied to the government for long leave, and I discovered all kinds of leaves which I never knew existed. There's full paid leave for 1 year, then there's half pay leave, then there's a leave called leave not due, which sounds surprising how to get it if it's not due, but you can take that as well. So I took all those leaves for 2 years, traveled with Tara, with my son Venkat as well, and never regretted it. I think that's perhaps one of the best decisions I've ever taken.
Great.
Right, sir. Sir, during your time as the SDM, and even in the book, you mentioned that when you're young and you're just into the service, it's a time to make blunders, it's a time to take chances, and you did all of that while you were the SDM or the DM. But don't you think that the space that was accorded to you at that time, that sort of luxury, new entrants into the civil services may not have, considering that media is everywhere, and now we have social media as well, keeping track of people's each and every move. So do you think it would be difficult for us to follow that advice of yours?
Yeah, no, actually, look, I fully recognize that it's a much more complex environment with social media, 24-hour news cycle. But I think the fundamentals remain the same. I was very lucky, and I remember visiting the academy frequently. My first posting was coming down to the valley to hang out with Sanjeev and others, who were doing their training in Mussoorie. And one of the good reasons I had to go to the academy was my job to enforce this Supreme Court ban on limestone quarrying. It was a great excuse, right? I used to go out checking for gattus carrying illegally mined limestone. And so I think coming back to your question on the media, you need to have a good boss. And I think many collectors, at least in great tradition in UP, and I'm sure in Bengal and everywhere else, collectors really look after young officers. In UP, the first posting of an IAS officer, you're known as a joint magistrate. And so I was SDM and joint magistrate of Dehradun subdivision. I had a fantastic boss, Mr. S.K. Das, who still lives in Dehradun. He knows Sanjeev well.
Yes,
so Sanjeev Das basically gave me carte blanche. And he supported me through thick and thin. My next collector in Dehradun was Atul Chaturvedi, who did the same thing. And they said, listen, go out and do whatever you need to do, and we'll protect you. So I think irrespective of the media, and in fact, even in those days, obviously there was no social media. There was a magazine called Himachal Star, which is actually run by the Limestone Quarry Association. And so when I made that kind of, I made that arrest for a kind of legally traveling truck, if you've read it in the book. So I still remember that headline. I was shocked. So I went to Surjit Das. I said, sir, what am I supposed to do? He said, relax. It's a mistake. It's fine. It's all bona fide and nothing will happen. Nothing did happen. So I think irrespective of the social media, I think all of us need to do what we have to do. But having said that, I think it's also very important to keep communication channels open. And I would say for a young officer, to just make sure that your collector knows exactly what you're doing, right? So, and that applies, I think, wherever we are. Your immediate boss, your commissioner, you need to keep them in the loop, because if you've gone out and taken a decision about something which is totally bona fide, but potentially it's sensitive, whether it's politically sensitive or it's a media issue, you keep your boss informed. And I don't think you need to worry too much about it, because people will recognize that you've done the right thing. So granted, it's a more difficult environment. As long as it's bona fide, I think it's fine.
I think the point which he's making is absolutely valid. You see, and in fact, another anecdote from his book comes to accepting what is perishable and what is edible. You know, throughout life, we have these occasions. We find it every day in our lives. So the ground rule is very clear that as long as you are accepting a gift which is comfortable for the person who's giving it, and it's also comfortable for you to accept it, and you can reciprocate it in the same measure. Now, you know, these are all examples which Param has quoted from his life as a young SDO, as a young district magistrate, and those are absolutely relevant even today. You know, some things change, but some things don't change. The fact that you are bona fide, you are a young officer, and that we are trying to to put our best foot forward, that there are no malintentions. If this is very clear, then the rest of the things will follow. And believe you me, all of us will have these moments where in our over enthusiasm, in our over enthusiasm and our excitement, we have to do things. Well, if you don't do it this age, what age are you going to do it? So go ahead. Don't get too hassle. The most important thing for all of us is that we need to understand the ecosystem around us. And not only do we have to understand the ecosystem around us, we also have to build the ecosystem around us. Like, for instance, if you start, I mean, if the SPM or the DM gives the impression that he's willing to accept all and sundry gifts, then you'll be inundated with these things. But you have to give a message without being rude and without trying to show that you come from a different section, that you will not interact with anybody. So we have to maintain that fine balance, and I'm sure as we go along, we'll get to it. Over to you, Shrestha.
Yes, sir. So, sir, you describe how the concept of Swachhata is different for an urban dweller and a rural dweller in your book, sir. So, sir, how did you integrate the different facets of Swachhata into a comprehensive concept that could be accepted by all the sections of the Indian population, sir?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that, Shrestha. You know, I wanted to make it clear in the book, because, you know, for a reader or a person who doesn't know too much about the sector or the government, Swachh Bharat, you know, particularly if you're living in an urban area, and it was important because many people on social media, most people are in kind of urban, peri-urban settings, although increasingly internet penetration is everywhere, right? So everyone knows everything. But the Swachh Bharat mission was actually in two parts. There was Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin and Swachh Bharat Mission Nagariya, or urban, which was being handled by the Ministry of Urban Development. Now I think it's called the Ministry of Urban Affairs, of Housing and Urban Affairs. So we were handling with the rural Swachh Bharat, which was the bulk of the problem, because there were still 550 million people who were practicing open defecation in rural India, and only about 50 in urban. Urban has got its own complexities. So clearly in rural, the most important, the most challenging issue was open defecation, right? Where people were, you know, defecating in the open, it leading to health problems, obviously security and indignity, particularly for women and girls. And the Prime Minister made that huge, bold announcement on 15th August 2014, where he said, you know, we're going to make India Swachh by 2019, 2nd October, Gandhiji's 150th birth anniversary. So that level of political leadership was made very clear. And in rural India, our focus, almost tunnel-like, which was very important, by the way, was on eliminating open defecation through launching a massive behavior change program and, of course, constructing toilets. Now, in urban areas, at that time also, and probably today, there were, of course, people defecating in the open, particularly in slums and other areas. But solid waste management was another major issue, particularly in urban areas. And of course, open drainage as well. So in urban areas, I would say solid waste management. Of course, other issues related to defecation as well. But I wanted to make that distinguish. But if you look at a comprehensive definition or articulation of Swachhata, it's got to be both open defecation free status but also solid and liquid waste management. And now the urban people had focused a lot on solid waste management, and you've seen the Swachh Sarvekshan, which encourages that. We also, in Swachh Bharat Phase 2, which has started about a year and a half ago, we got the cabinet approval for Swachh Bharat Phase 2, which embraces a broader definition of Swachhata. So it's looking at ODF to ODF plus. We need always to sustain the outcomes of ODF, to keep the behavior change going, the communication, the capacity building, the incentives to remain open defecation free, but also even in rural areas and peri-urban areas, looking at solid waste management and liquid waste management. So solid waste is all about plastic waste management as well as organic waste management, which is how do you manage gobar, how do you convert that to energy, and looking at liquid waste management, which is grey water management, which is typically the water which comes out of your tap in the kitchen and out of bathing, and that doesn't have the level of contamination which black water or septic tank water has. All that is now included in a broader definition of Swachhata, not to mention hygienic behavior, particularly during the pandemic, which is washing your hands with soap and keeping your water clean. So this is a broader definition which is now being taken forward under Swachh Bharat Phase 2.
Sir, I want to ask you that while you were formulating the policy, the Swachh Bharat mission, so what did you think were going to be the major challenges in implementing as well as sustaining the mission? And now that so many years have passed since the mission was implemented, so do you think many of these concerns were valid, or were there some new challenges that cropped up along the way?
Sure. So, Chandrajyoti, when I joined, there were many big challenges, right? And the four biggest ones, as far as we were concerned, were what we called the four S's. How do we deal with the four S's? These were scale, 550 million people needing to change behavior, 60% of the world's open defecators. So, Sustainable Development Goal 6.2 could never have been achieved if India hadn't become open defecation free. So first was just the scale of the problem. The second was speed. The Prime Minister had given a 5-year window. And so, over 70 years when sanitation programs had taken place, but incrementally, and coverage was only 38 or 39% when Swachh Bharat started, to go to 100% in 5 years, you needed speed. As it turned out, I think the Prime Minister's window was perfect. We talk of the Goldilocks approach, not too hot, not too cold, just right. I think that 5-year window was just right. It was long enough to get the job done, but short enough to maintain that energy. The third S was stigma. How do you change behavior? Centuries old practice of open defecation. And so this was not really about, constructing toilets, although more than 100 million or 10 crore toilets were built. It was more about changing that deep-rooted behavior. And how do you make it a people's participation movement, a Jan Andolan? And the fourth S was sustainability. How do you sustain these outcomes? In many programs, you think mission accomplished. Actually, it's never mission accomplished. You need to keep working at it. How do you sustain that behavior change? So I'm sure you have gone through the book called Nudge, Behavioral Economics by Thaler and Sunstein. So Cass Sunstein is a good friend. He came to India. He advised us. He told me, listen, to sustain behavior change and make it stick, you need to work at it for at least 2 to 4 years beyond any milestone being achieved. So sustainability was the fourth challenge. And looking back, I think we were successful to a large extent. It's never perfect. But I think that what really worked for us, how did we address this? We had to deal with scale. So we had 600,000 Swachhagrahis on the ground, boots on the ground. We had 550 young professionals who were supplied by the Tata Trust, who worked in every district with the eyes and ears of the collector. We had, I don't know how many million, 250 million school children, or whatever that number is, who were the best ambassadors. And of course, we had the communicator-in-chief, the Prime Minister. That was phenomenal of how he envisioned the program, articulated the objectives, was our communicator-in-chief. So I think that made a big difference. So the 4 Ps we learned, which really helped us, were political leadership, and public financing was the second, where more than $20 billion, 1.3 lakh crores were invested. The late Mr. Arun Jaitley, having understood the importance of sanitation as a public good and it's huge ripple effects, whether it's on health, on the economic benefits, environmental benefits. So government invested in this. And the third P was partnerships with organizations like the World Bank, the Gates Foundation, UNICEF, but also with grassroots NGOs, with sarpanchas, with people on the ground who really promoted and triggered behavior change. And the fourth P, of course, was people's participation. How this became a sanitation revolution and something that the Prime Minister always spoke about कि इसको एक जन आंदोलन के रूप में चलाना चाहिए, ये कभी एक सरकारी program नहीं हो सकता है. So I think those were the challenges. I think looking back, we addressed most of them, and of course, there's still much more work to be done.
Great. So I think, what the point that is becoming very clear is that if there is a clear political leadership, if the message is very clear, if the roles are very clearly defined, if funds are available, and you can mobilize the public to be with you, then any success can be achieved in the government system. Passion has to be part of our professional approach. And I think that's the point which Param is making all the time. And it's very important for all of us, especially those of us who are in the civil services, to realize and recognize that unless we can match the expectations which both the political leadership and the public have from us, the question that often comes up, that why should not there be lateral entrance, why should this not happen? That will obviously happen. And of course, there is no such thing, there's no great fear of the lateral entrant, with the elephant in the room, which all of us keep discussing in the academy. I mean, at one level, Param was also a lateral entrant. But lateral entrant does not mean that you is somebody from the world of Mars. I mean, the lateral entrant, the technocrat, the knowledge worker, the specialist, all of us are part of an ecosystem, and the ecosystem is to deliver results. Individual brilliance is not an end in itself, and that's the point which throughout the book you find that unless you build teams, unless you understand ecosystem, unless you develop those ecosystems, you will not be very successful. So last question from Shrestha and Chandrajyoti, because we'll have to close for now, and we will also have to give the last two words to Param. Over to you, Shrestha.
So I will continue from the previous question. So you mentioned, sir, that due to the unprecedented scale of the Swachh Bharat mission and the speed at which it needed to be implemented, there were many senior officials who were skeptical regarding it. So how did you make them believe, sir, that this goal was achievable and realistic?
Yeah, so when I joined the ministry, initially I might have said skeptical, but I think there was a level of concern at the scale of this program, and particularly because most of these subjects, sanitation, water, forests, they're all agriculture, they're all state subjects. So ultimately, the implementation is at the local level, right, under the control of the state. So how can the government of India inspire, motivate, cajole state governments in implementing a national program like the Swachh Bharat mission? And can we as in the government of India, can we really be held accountable for a program which is not directly in our control? Of course, we're giving some financial incentives and we're giving technical assistance. So those were some of the questions which came up when I started interacting with my team in the ministry initially. And so, I always felt that we needed to become believers, right? The Prime Minister had articulated a vision, and it was important that, I believed in it. I'd been brought in for that. And I think that we needed to create a team of belief, because unless everyone initially in the ministry was on board, the flat team, we brought in a lot of young professionals. I was sort of given carte blanche to bring in good officers, people who were interested in the job. Because as the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation, the toilet ministry is not very high up in the pecking order, right? Conventionally for civil servants to go to. You'd rather be in economic affairs or in petroleum or other ministries which are sort of more glamorous. So, but, we ended up making sanitation glamorous, but it was important to make everyone believe. And in many ways, I found that one thing which Prime Minister Modi brought about was he kind of made implementation very real and something which happens on the ground. And I actually refer to it in some ways as the policy of implementation. It sounds like a contradiction because policy is typically dissociated. And as Sanjeev has been very articulately saying, everything needs to come together, policy and implementation. And so you need to believe, you need to be aligned, and then everything flows if you've got a clear-cut goal and you've got a clear-cut strategy. So I think getting everyone on board took a few months. Then after that, it was more a matter of keeping people in the loop of what is going on and working with the states. And I think the formula, which in the UP cadre at least we call PM, CM, DM. There's no better formula than that. You guys are going to go out and be DMs. The DM is implementing, so many programs. How do we get this program to be prioritized on the DM's agenda? And for that, we decided to help the DM by giving the DM a young professional, Zilla Swachh Bharat Prerak, to make it easier. So I think bringing about that sense of belief, excitement, passion for a program, it makes it that much easier to implement as opposed to something which is done under sufferance.
Great. So over to you, Chandrajyoti. Last question.
Right, sir. So, sir, I would like to ask you something on a lighter note. So, as road manager and coach to your daughter, did you come across any new ideas or some new learnings that you decided to incorporate into your work life?
Yeah, no, look, I think that there were many, one of the funniest incidents at that time, it wasn't, where, it sort of taught me a little bit about the need to be able to do everything yourself and not depend on others. So Tara was playing a tournament in Chongqing in China. It's one of the hottest cities. It's known as the furnace city. And she was playing these long matches and she was sweating so much in 100 degrees Fahrenheit that she soaked through 2 pairs of tennis shoes. And she had a match the next morning. And her shoes were so wet that I had literally spent the whole night as part of my job in drying her shoes with a hair dryer borrowed from the hotel. So, I was drying her shoes, and that, reminded me the next time we travel, she needs to carry 5 pairs of shoes if you're playing in such temperature. But apart from that, it was just, washing her clothes. I sort of got used to being a non-Sarkari type. So I was washing her clothes. She was cooking dinner. I was making breakfast. But, it was just doing things by myself, something. But on a more serious note, one lesson I learned, which I think is really important, is that I think it's one of my pro tips, is that if you're giving feedback to someone, you need to pick the right moment. Tara lost this match. I think it was in Indonesia. Third set tiebreaker. That's the only time I've ever seen her fling her racket to the ground. She's normally pretty cool. So she was really upset by that. And I started saying something and, she just reacted. I realized that if you've got to talk, because, there's a tendency, why did you do this? You didn't come to the net enough. You got only so much percentage of first serves. You should have hit more forehand down the lines. So all that can wait, right? So after an hour, she had cooled off. When we had the discussion, it made me realize that don't give feedback to someone, particularly if you're trying to improve them at a moment when they're not ready to receive it, right? They've got to be in a calm frame of mind. So I think that's one of the lessons, one of the many lessons I learned from that stint as road manager.
And I think one more thing which I personally feel is, that must have cut the generation gap. Normally we've all, at least I have had this issue with growing up with my parents and then also with my daughter, although it's much less, hopefully. But I think, this is a very important tip. How do you break the generation gap? So if you can travel with your teenage son and daughter, you bridge a great barrier. And you also learn a lot about the next generation, which is something which, if it does not happen, can create a major personal stress. And I think personal stress will not lead you to do the best on the professional front. So I think one of the great qualities of Param Iyer as we go through this book is the need to balance the personal, the professional, the physical, because he's also very fit. He's also very good in his personal approach and with his connection with his family, and of course a true and an outstanding professional. So thank you very much, Param, for having talked to the young officers of the Society for Contemporary Affairs, and all of us in the Academy are very delighted that you are with us. Your thing will also be broadcast over the CSOI, and I'm sure that a lot of civil servants will have a lot of questions for you. And if there are questions, do let us know on the chat box. We'll ask Param to respond to them. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. All the best. Bye-bye. Thanks once again.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure, and I really wish I'd been at the Academy, but it was wonderful interacting with all of you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shrestha. Thank you, Anupam. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Bye.